Page 3. 20 or so miles due west of Healy, not far from the boundary of Denali National Park, a derelict bus, a blue and white 1940s vintage International from the Fairbanks City Transit System, rusts incongruously in the fireweed beside the Stampede Trail. Many winters ago, the bus was fitted with bedding and a crude barrel stove, then skidded into the bush by enterprising hunters to serve as a backcountry shelter. These days, it isn't unusual for 9 or 10 months to pass without the bus seeing a human visitor. But on September 6, 1992, 6 people in 3 separate parties happened to visit it on the same afternoon, including Ken Thompson, Gordon Sammel, and Ferdy Swanson, moose hunters who drove in an all-terrain vehicles. When they arrived at the bus, says Thompson, they found a guy and a girl from Anchorage standing 50 feet away, looking kind of spooked. A real bad smell was coming from inside the bus, and there was this weird note tacked by the door. The note, written in neat block letters on a page torn from a novel by Gogol, read, SOS, I need your help. I am injured, near death, and too weak to hike out of here. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries, close by, and shall return this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless. August. The Anchorage couple had been too upset by the implications of the note to examine the bus's interior, so Thompson and Samuel steeled themselves to take a look. A peek through a window revealed a .22 caliber rifle, a box of shells, some books and clothing, a backpack, and, on a makeshift bunk in the rear of the vehicle, a blue sleeping bag that appeared to have something or someone inside it. It was hard to be absolutely sure, says Samuel. I stood on a stump, reached through a back window, and gave the bag a shake. There was definitely something in it, but whatever it was didn't weigh much. It wasn't until I walked around to the other side and saw a head sticking out that I knew for certain what it was. Chris McCandless had been dead for some 2.5 weeks. The Alaska State Troopers were contacted, and the next morning a police helicopter evacuated the decomposed body, a camera with 5 rolls of exposed film, and a diary written across the last 2 pages of a field guide to edible plants that recorded the young man's final weeks in 113 terse, haunting entries. An autopsy revealed no internal injuries or broken bones. Starvation was suggested as the most probable cause of death. McCandless's signature had been penned at the bottom of the SOS note, and the photos, when developed, included many self-portraits. But because he had been carrying no identification, the police knew almost nothing about who he was or where he was from. Carthage, South Dakota, population 274, is a sleepy little cluster of clapboard houses, weathered brick storefronts, and shaded yards that rise as humbly from the immensity of northern plains. Adrift in time. It has 1 grocery, 1 bank, a single gas station, a lone bar. The Cabaret, where Wayne Westerberg, a hyperkinetic man with thick shoulders and a rakish black goatee, is sipping a White Russian, chewing on a sweet cigar, and remembering the enigmatic young man he knew as Alex. These are what Alex used to drink, says Westerberg with a smile, hoisting his glass. He used to sit right there at the end of the bar and tell us these amazing stories of his travels. He could talk for hours. Page 4. Westerberg owns a grain elevator in town, but spends every summer running a custom combined crew that follows the harvest from Texas north to Montana. In September 1990, he'd been in Montana cutting barley when, on the highway east of Cut Bank, he'd given a ride to a hungry-looking hitchhiker, a friendly young man who said his name was Alex McCandless. They hit it off immediately, and before they went their separate ways, Westerberg told Alex to look him up in Carthage if he ever needed a job. About 2 weeks later, said Westerberg, he thumbed into town, moved into my house, and went to work at the elevator. He was the hardest worker I've ever seen. And totally honest, what you'd call extremely ethical. He set pretty high standards for himself. You could tell right away that Alex was intelligent, Westerberg continues. In fact, I think maybe part of what got him into trouble was that he did too much thinking. Sometimes he tried too hard to make sense of the world, to figure out why people were bad to each other so often. A couple of times I tried to tell him it was a mistake to get too deep into that kind of stuff. But Alex got stuck on things. He always had to know the absolute right answer before he could go on to the next thing. McCandless didn't stay in Carthage long. By the end of October, he was on the road again, but he dropped Westerberg a postcard every month or two in that course of his travels. He also had all his mail forwarded to Westerberg's house and told everybody he met thereafter that he was from South Dakota. In truth, McCandless had been raised in the comfortable, upper-middle-class environs of Annandale, Virginia. His father, Walt, was an aerospace engineer who ran a small but very prosperous consulting firm with Chris's mother, Billy. There were 8 children in the extended family: Chris, a younger sister, Corrine, with whom Chris was extremely close, and 6 older half-siblings from Walt's first marriage. McCandless had graduated in June 1990 from Emory University in Atlanta, where he distinguished himself as a history anthropology major and was offered but declined membership in Phi Beta Kappa, insisting that titles and honors were of no importance. His education had been paid for by a college fund established by his parents. There was some $20,000 in this account at the time of his graduation, money his parents thought he intended to use for law school. Instead, he donated the entire sum to the Oxford Famine Relief Fund. Then, without notifying any friends or family members, he loaded all his belongings into a decrepit yellow Datsun and headed west without itinerary, relieved to shed a life of abstraction and security, a life he felt was removed from the heat and throb of the real world. Chris McCandless intended to invent a new life for himself, one in which he would be free to wallow in unfiltered experience. In July 1990, on a 120-degree afternoon near Lake Mead, his car broke down and he abandoned it in the Arizona desert. McCandless was exhilarated, so much so that he decided to bury most of his worldly possessions in the parched earth of Detrital Wash, and then, in a gesture that would have done Tolstoy proud, burned his last remaining cash, about $160, in small bills. We know this because he documented the conflagration and most of the events that followed in a journal snapshot album he would later give to Westerberg. Although the tone of the journal occasionally veers toward melodrama, the available evidence indicates that McCandless did not misrepresent the facts. Telling the truth was a credo he took very seriously. Page 5. McCandless tramped around the West for the next 2 months, spellbound by the scale and power of the landscape, thrilled by minor brushes with the law, savoring the intermittent company of other vagabonds he met along the way. He hopped trains, hitched rides, and walked the trails of the Sierra Nevada before crossing paths with Westerberg in Montana. In November, he sent Westerberg a postcard from Phoenix, urging him to read War and Peace. It has things in it that I think you will understand, things that escape most people. And complaining that thanks to the money Westerberg had paid him, tramping had become too easy. My days were more exciting when I was penniless and had to forage around for my next meal, he wrote. I've decided that I'm going to live this life for some time to come. The freedom and simple beauty of it is just too good to pass up. One day I'll get back to you, Wayne, and repay some of your kindness. Immediately after writing that card, McCandless bought a second-hand aluminum canoe near the head of Lake Havasu and decided to paddle it down the Colorado River all the way to the Gulf of California. En route, he sneaked into Mexico by shooting the spillway of a small dam and got lost repeatedly. But he made it to the Gulf, where he struggled to control the canoe, in a violent squall far from shore, and, exhausted, decided to head north again. On January 16, 1991, McCandless left the stubby metal boat on a hummock of dune grass southeast of Golfo de Santa Clara and started walking north up the deserted beach. He had not seen or talked to another soul in 36 days. For that entire period, he had subsisted on nothing but 5 pounds of rice and what he could pull from the sea, an experience that would later convince him he could survive on similarly meager rations when he went to live in the Alaskan bush. Back at the border 2 days later, he was caught trying to slip into the United States without ID and spent a night in custody before concocting a story that got him across. McCandless spent most of the next year in Southwest, but the last entry in the journal he left with Westerberg is dated May 10th, 1991, and so the record of his travels in this period is sketchy. He slummed his way through San Diego, El Paso, and Houston to avoid being rolled and robbed by the unsavory characters who ruled the streets and freeway overpasses where he slept. He learned to bury what money he had before entering a city, then recover it on the way out of town. Snapshots in the album document visits to Bryce and Zion, the Grand Canyon, Joshua Tree, Palm Springs. For several weeks, he lived with bums, tramps, and winos on the streets of Las Vegas. When 1991 drew to a close, McCandless was in Bullhead City, Arizona, where for 3 months he lived in a tent and flipped burgers at McDonald's. A letter from this period reveals that a girl, Tracy, had a crush on him. In a note to Westerberg, he admitted that he liked Bullhead City and might finally settle down and abandon my tramping life for good. I'll see what happens when spring comes around, because that's when I tend to get really itchy feet. Itchy feet prevailed. He soon called Westerberg and said that he wanted to work in the grain elevator for a while, just long enough to put together a little grub stake. He needed money to buy some new gear, he said, because he was going to Alaska.